everyone to our Agile panel. The purpose, Agile has been the buzz for the last several years in the IT world and expanding to other types of industries, applications, and projects. As students, you should know that Agile is not just a trend, but it's gone global, with research from such institutions as MIT suggests that Agile firms grow revenue faster, but also showed a substantial increase in productivity. This session will present experiences from individuals who have applied Agile methods in a variety of different environments on topics generated by students. What we're hoping you will learn and have a better understanding is why Agile matters, why companies adopt Agile, Agile teamwork, and where to start learning off about Agile. Introduce our panels. First, we have Larry Belmontes. All right, Larry brings 30 plus years of experience in various industries, including financial, life insurance, and college administration systems. During his tenure, Larry held various positions as a software engineer, manager, director, project manager, and consultant. Larry was involved with business critical initiatives, adapting new technologies in current IT application suites, where he helped stakeholders enhance overall back office and customer-facing user experiences, including application effectiveness for IT investments. He holds multiple certifications, a PMP, CSM, CCP, and holds an MBA in Management Information Systems from the University of Dallas. As his way of giving back to the community, as a member of the Alamo PMI chapter, he volunteers as a PMM mentor and a PMP prep instructor. Larry also serves on the board of directors as VP for the San Antonio chapter of the Association of IT Professionals. Our next panelist is Jeff York. Jeff York is a senior Agile Project Manager for Frost Bank. He received his BS degree in Business Administration and his Master's degree in Information Technology. Using planned, adaptive, and hybrid project management approaches, he is responsible for the implementation of business systems and support of lines of business programs. He is also a project management adjunct instructor at large. He is a PMP, a PMI ACP, and a CSPO certified. Our next panelist is Ron Thorpe. Ron is an Agile coach, Scrum Master, and is it Kanban?
Kanban.
Master and project manager with over 35 years in the information technology industry, working with leaders such as Digital Equipment Corporation, the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games, Lexmark, Perceptive Software, and USAA. He has also been focused on delivering value through Agile methodologies since 2006. Ron enjoys the process of converting corporate cultures from waterfall to Agile. He is also very active in the Alamo chapter of PMI, serving as director of the PMI ACP exam training. Certifications include CSM, CSPO, and CSP through Scrum Alliance, PMP, and PMA ACP through PMI, and Scaled Agile through Scaled Agile Framework. And then our last panelist is Brian Weiss. Brian has over 18 years of project management experience working for just companies as USAA Tech Systems as a lead project manager and business project manager, IEM Incorporated as a director of IT services, a team lead at Jacobs Engineering, a project director at XEETO Incorporated, a project manager and PMO operations manager for Blackhawk Management Corporation, as a director of operations for the Pacific region. Brian is a retired Army officer. He has an MBA in Information Systems Management from Oklahoma City University and a BA in Economics from St. Lawrence University. Brian has his PMI ACP, PMP, Scaled Agile Framework, and an ITIL Foundation certification. He is a member of the American Mensa Society. He is a past president of the Project Management Institute chapter in the Greater New Orleans area and current board member for the Project Management Institute Alamo chapter and board member of the Alamo Agilistas chapter of the Scrum Alliance. Brian is also a volunteer for the Warrior Family Support Center at Fort Sam Houston.
In my spare time.
All right, we'll start off our first. It's going to be an introduction to Agile. So our first question, I'll start with Larry. What is Agile and why should I care?
Agile approaches apply to software development, project management, as you guys probably have heard or studied. It's the ability to move fast and easy. I was going to say fast and furious, but fast and easy by targeting short divisions of work with repeated reassessments and the opportunity to update plans as you go along. Why is it important? I think you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier in your intro. Technology today is changing pretty fast. Another expectation from our business partners is that they want something today, not next year, not 6 months from now, like in a traditional waterfall project initiative. So that's one of the reasons why I think a student should care about it today.
Definitely. Jeff, do you have anything to add to this?
I would just add, to me, Agile is an umbrella term. You'll hear a lot of people use it interchangeably, Agile, Scrum, XP, whatever. But really think of it as an umbrella term, which encompasses a number of processes and practices that are aligned with the Agile Manifesto. So just think of an umbrella. That's Agile. Lots of different ways to do it beneath that. And why I think it's important. For the same reasons that Larry said, but also if you plan on going into the project management field and you're obviously proficient with waterfall traditional type project management as well as agile project management, and you take one more step and you become familiar with the hybrid type approach, the job opportunities are endless because organizations are very, very quickly embracing both waterfall, agile, and in some cases a hybrid approach. So the sky's the limit as far as opportunity.
Definitely agreed there. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I always have something to add. I work at USA as a contractor. I'm primarily working for Tech Systems, and I have lunch with them on a monthly basis just to kind of keep up with things. Our conversation today talked around the market. The supply project manager is pretty slim. So y'all need to hurry up and graduate because there's a job market out there waiting for you. And if you understand diversity of project management from Agile to Waterfall and the differences, you'll be that much farther ahead. My personal view on Agile, there's really no other way to do project management. I look at it as the maturity of the project management profession to a much more efficient and functional state. And I mean functional because we bring the business into the fold and make them actually work to figure out what it is they really want. We don't just take a bunch of requirements and go build something and come back and hope that they like it. We actually engage them throughout and make them actually part of the entire process. So a lot more value delivered earlier. It's a huge advantage. And if you run out of money, you've prioritized your backlog well enough, you've delivered the value that the business will do well with. I can go on, but I think I'll
I think I can speak for all students here. We are trying to graduate as fast as we possibly can. I don't think no one's dragging their feet on that. Ron, do you have anything to add to that?
About the only thing I can think of is that for the most part, what Agile gives you is the ability to get the right product to the customer as quickly as possible without any of the bells and whistles that they really don't need. And by doing that and satisfying the customer and delighting them as quickly as possible, you're all going to keep your jobs longer.
All right, I'll stop.
Just one comment. When you're the only one in the chaos of a project that knows what's going on, then you're the hero.
Larry, what makes Agile methodology different from more traditional approaches, say waterfall?
Well, as you guys know, waterfall is really more of a sequential type of approach, kind of a big bang approach to delivery, whereas Agile, you just break it up into smaller pieces. One thing that has already been mentioned is Agile is flexible. you can adapt change into it very easily. Whereas in a waterfall project, you typically guard against changes because you've pre-planned, you've pre-designed for the long haul. And the other thing is the teams themselves in an agile environment are structured a little bit different than a typical waterfall. So as I believe Brian mentioned, you've got participation from the business as well as technology. It's a small team, and their job is to really get the work done quick with customer value as the focus, as opposed to constraint valued, if you want to call it that, in a waterfall approach.
Now, Jeff, is there any other differences of Agile from Waterfall or any other more traditional?
Larry didn't leave me much. So here's my 2 cents that I would add, just another way to think about it. So your traditional project management, your waterfall is a planned approach. In other words, you make the plan up front. You know the requirements. You develop the plan, whereas an agile approach is really an adaptive approach. You might know some of the requirements, but you don't know all of them. And so the agile, as Larry said, approach, you expect change and change requests and to be able to shift left and shift right, whereas the traditional waterfall, not so much.
You have anything else to add down there, Brian? No, you want to talk.
Well,
He does. He does.
the role of the project manager in the two worlds is completely different. A lot of project managers get comfortable in the role of sort of the autocratic director in the waterfall environment, telling people what to do and when their deadlines are and all that kind of crap, all of that I hate doing. I much more prefer enabling the team, giving them the backlog, letting them figure out how to organize, helping them meet a goal by keeping all the obstacles out of their way. And that's really the Scrum Master's role. Much more effective use of people's time, much more collaborative communication amongst everybody involved, particularly the business. And I really have to hammer that one again, because the early delivery of value to the business is one of the biggest advantages of going the Agile route. I can talk all day long, so I'll shut up.
What's your opinion on the topic, Ron?
It's real simple because in waterfall, you have to do all your planning up front. You have to figure out up front everything that the customer might want. And when it's finally delivered to the customer, it's been shown that the customer only uses at most 20% of the features and functionality either all the time or most of the time. So that means that 80% of your work effort is there just to introduce bugs and problems. So yeah, we're all doing the best we can. And if we have to wait 9 months before we give something to someone, then we're going to give them everything possible. If we only have to wait 3 weeks or 2 weeks or a month, we can say, is this what you wanted? Oh, no, I don't need that feature. Great, it's gone. And we can adjust it, as we need to.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to our next topic. This is Agile Adoption. I'm going to give Jeff, you can start us off this time. What are the best approaches for adoption of Agile in an organization?
So that's a great question, whoever came up with that one. I actually had to go back and do a little bit of research. And as you might suspect, there's a number of approaches that you could do to adopt Agile within an organization. But instead of talking about, just picking an approach, I like to think of the question just a little bit differently and say, what are the right conditions for an organization to adopt Agile? And some of the conditions that I wrote down were awareness. First of all, the organization has to have an awareness that the current process isn't working for them and not producing the results that were expected. Secondly, they have to have the desire. There has to be a desire to practice Agile within that organization. Ability, just because you want to do it and you can spell Agile doesn't mean you have the ability to do it. And so there's usually training involved in that type of thing. Promotion, once you're doing Agile, there has to be a way to radiate that information the successes and the exchange of information between team members, the team and the business, so forth and so on. And then lastly, transfer, meaning for it to be successful, for Agile to be successful within an organization, it has to be bigger than just the Agile team. It has to grow. It has to transfer outside the team to the other departments like HR, finance, and places like that. You can't do Agile successfully in isolation within an organization. So again, I would look at the conditions to make sure that the conditions within your organization are ripe for some sort of Agile adaptation.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm experiencing migration toward Agile at USA right now. It's a rather painful process for a lot of reasons, most of which, at least in my experience, is just cultural bias. People get used to doing things a certain way. I was told when I was preparing to get my PMP decades ago, in one of my prep classes, the speaker started out the whole 2-day session with talking about stress and project management. And he said that project management was the fourth most stressful occupation that exists on the planet after ER doctor, technician, air traffic controller, and police officer. Project manager number 4. He said the reason that project management is so stressful is because it's change. You deal with change all the time. Everything changes in project management. Your team, your budget, your timeline, everything. Your requirements, everything changes. So that adverse experience, change being adverse to the human condition, is what we deal with. And if you're dealing with a total cultural paradigm like migrating to Agile, you can imagine the fun that might be.
All right, thank you, Brian. Ron, what's your take on this?
Okay, I think that changing and adopting Agile, you have to start with training, which is pretty simple. But what's more important is changing the mindset. Traditional project management is very directive. Agile is very, very participatory, and it's very hard for a lot of organizations to understand that a developer is not more important than a tester, and a person that does the documentation is not less important than a developer. On an Agile team, everyone is just as important. They're just a team member, and they have different skill sets, but any person on the team can destroy the entire team. And the other thing that just goes out the door really quick are heroes. Those people that really know all their stuff and don't share everything. So what you need to do when you transform an organization is to change the metrics from, you actually have to measure up. So the only way a person gets a raise is if their whole team does well. The only way the manager of a team gets a raise is if every team on that person's level, all his peers also do well. So in an Agile mindset and an Agile transformation in an organization, what you have to do is change the thinking from me to us.
I definitely agree with that. Larry, what's your take on this question?
Let's see, I think I can probably repeat what Jeff said earlier. Actually, what I had documented was the organization has to establish and foster cultural change, and I believe that was spoken to already. And there's got to be an appetite for re-education, training, obviously organizational change, and rethinking at the organizational level. If you can overcome those issues, the only thing I could probably add to what's been mentioned, at least directly, is perhaps doing some type of a pilot project utilizing Agile, but you have to be careful with that because you really don't want to set up for failure. So maybe take something that's non-critical, because you are now practicing something net new to the organization, if that is the case. There's no need in transitioning from traditional, whatever that may be in your company, to waterfall overnight, because it's just not going to go anywhere. And you'll definitely be ranked as number 4. Is that what you said, Brian?
Yeah.
Number 4. So,
Just a couple of things I'll throw out. The value to an organization can almost be limitless, but for that spark to catch, early victories mean a lot. It gives you that momentum that the organization really catches their attention and they want to do it. Secondly, it's important to have a champion, somebody who's going to hold the banner and lead the way. That person has to be pretty much impenetrable. They have to have armor because they're going to take a lot of shots. But those two key elements in transition are critical.
Let's move on to our second question. So I'm going to start off with Jeff once again. Now, what mistakes have you seen an organization make in implementing Agile, and what insights did you gain?
So prior to working at Frost Bank, I was consulting for a number of years. So I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of different organizations. And I think the two biggest mistakes that I've seen over and over and over, one was mistakenly making the assumption that everybody on the new project team shares the same understanding of Agile. I never seen it once where everybody shared the same exact understanding. So if you start off the project with different understandings and different perceptions of Agile, it just goes downhill from there. The second mistake that I've routinely seen was there wasn't enough thought given to the actual characteristics of the project that we were about to begin. And so not every project should be an Agile project. You really have to consider the characteristics of the project and determine what is the best approach for this. And I found myself in a couple situations where just by the way the contract was written, somebody said, I want an Agile project. They wrote a waterfall contract and then put a hybrid team together. And that's difficult to manage.
Brian, do you have anything to add?
One of the projects I'm working on now is a brand new Agile team. In fact, it's a operations and maintenance group that have never done Agile. I'm starting out by getting the leadership together and convincing them all the goodness. And they, surprisingly enough, they suggested that I give classes to the whole team so that they all understand what it is we're trying to do and we don't blindside them with something that they can't digest. So I'm going to do that, planning for next week, and kick off their Kanban board and get them underway.
Ron, from your past experience?
Sure. Two things. First one I've seen is an Agile team, quote, Agile team, a new team will continue with their waterfall methods using the Agile terms. So, yeah, they continue to do what they've done, their entire lives. And because I'm using the new terminology, it's got to be Agile. Well, that's not it. They want to focus on tasks and, sequentially doing everything and having 15 things going on at the same time. Well, I'm working on this and I'm working on this and I'm working on that, and it doesn't work. They're just doing what they always did, trying to say, oh, well, that task is really a story. That's not an end user deliverable. The second thing that I see time and time again is Agile, you're allowed over time to change the process, to tweak it. And it's expected because no one does it exactly the same way. But people don't like change. And one of the things that you have to do is make sure that the pain that you're feeling at any given moment, is it due to the actual change in the process, or is the process wrong? You have to continue doing it the same way for about 3 months before you make the attempt to change it, because you have to get into the cadence and the rhythm of the correct way before you start changing it. And I see a lot of teams that change it after 2 weeks right away, and within 3 months, they're not an Agile team, they're not anything anymore. It's total chaos.
Sounds like some of our college teams. Larry, have you seen any mistakes?
The one example that I can draw from is in a enterprise level project where you have teams that are utilizing both Agile and Waterfall, but they want to use the project manager as the Scrum Master. So that's probably like mistake number one. Because the project manager is really going to be more task oriented, as was mentioned earlier, and decision maker. Whereas really the Scrum Master needs to really work with the team to act as a facilitator. Basically wipe the road clean from any barriers that might be in their way, whatever that may be. And that team is both on the technical side and the business side, or functional and technical sides. So that's the only, well, that's one area that I've experienced.
Start back with Jeff in this question. In what environments is Agile going to work be most successful?
I would say that environments where the goal is very clear and concise, but the requirements are not as concise, and so there's room for elaboration and discovery and learning, would be probably the best environment.
Would that work outside of IT, or is it more just successful in IT?
Well, I've not practiced Agile outside of IT, but I would, based on my understanding of things, I think it would work the same pretty much in any industry.
Brian, would you have anything to add?
I agree. I think Agile is universal. The principles really apply to pretty much any project endeavor. Doesn't matter the industry. One of the important things for any company is that you have leadership support. If it's not universally accepted by the whole company, makes for a very challenging environment. So that's probably an environment that's least effective.
Well, for me, it's pretty simple. If the one time you don't want to use Agile is if you're doing something time and time and time again, repeating yourself. If the requirements are known and the process is known and the schedule is known, you don't need Agile for that. You want to stick with the waterfall. You want to keep straight, concise, hone up your skills, really well there. At the same time, as Jeff said, if it's total chaos and you don't know the requirements and you don't know how to do it, that's just an area of chaos. And Agile is for complex projects. So not simple projects and not chaos projects, but complex.
Larry?
Two things here. I think a conducive environment, and prior panelists had mentioned this, collaboration, but just having an environment where you can have active user participation. And I mean that across the board, not only at the technology side or the DBA and the Java programmer. And the team has to be able to make decisions. The team has to be able to be responsible. You don't want to be practicing a waterfall type of approach in terms of management, or one environment that adheres to that. The other thing I was going to add, based on what was just mentioned in terms of simple and complex, if you look at a project in terms of requirements, are they ill-defined or are they well-defined? And if you look at technology in terms of being very certain or very uncertain. It was mentioned that a project could be complex if those two axes become very uncertain or very ill-defined. And if you can actually bring a project or chunk or iterate a project into a smaller component that becomes simple, or maybe less complex, I should say, then that may be conducive for an agile approach.
Okay. Now, I think we've, our panelists have pretty much answered this question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Start back with Jeff. Now, how do you know if Agile isn't right for your organization?
Well, there's a number of ways to know if it's not right for your organization. I'll just echo what was just said a moment ago. If your projects are typically the same type of projects repeatedly, their activities are very routine, perhaps you use templates very frequently, that leads you to believe that your requirements are very well known. And in that case, you would really want to consider a traditional waterfall type project and not an agile approach.
Okay. Brian?
I think that subject's been beaten to death.
One additional way to know is if the business really needs one throat to choke, and they really want one throat to choke, and they don't want to, they're not willing to spread the authority down to the teams, then don't do Agile.
That's for sure.
Anything to add, Larry?
I'll only add a couple of things. One is there's no change agents. There's no support for this new methodology. And I mean across the organization, not only in one silo or department. And obviously the organization's not going to change.
All right, we'll move on to our next topic. This is going to be Agile teams. I'll start with Brian. How do leadership roles and responsibilities differ in Agile teams than traditional?
Traditional projects, project manager is the holder of the schedule, manages budget, organizes the teams, manages resources, manages stakeholders, all the things you're learning in all your classes. Agile, the Scrum Master, has a whole different perspective. Really doesn't worry about the money. You stop the project when you run out of money, or when the business has realized the value that they wanted out of the project. So that's off the table. Backlog is managed, the requirements backlog is managed by the business, so project manager doesn't have to quite worry about that so much. That's kind of dictated by the customer. That's good, because that way you know that the business is going to get, or the customer is going to get what they're asking for. Focusing on the 5 Agile ceremonies is really the core concerns for the Scrum Master. Making sure that the team is not just going through the motions, but going to each ceremony with intent, and that we're getting the value out of each of the ceremonies to continue the momentum of the project team towards the iteration end and delivering that demonstrated value to the business.
Ron?
Okay, for me, it's really the difference between the servant leader versus being in charge. Project manager is in charge. They're the one throat to choke. They're the ones that, if everything succeeds, they get promotions, and it's their responsibility to go down and make sure that the team feels valued. In Agile, it's the team that gets all the recognition, and it's the responsibility of the team to make sure that the Scrum Master and the APO feel valued. So at the same time, being a servant leader is really important. I think, Brian just said that the Scrum Master is responsible for the ceremonies. They're responsible for a lot more than the ceremonies. They're the ones that actually subtly make the team a cohesive unit and a team in itself. It's a full-time job. And if you are given an opportunity to be a Scrum Master for 5 teams, run away. 2 teams maybe, but anything more than 2 teams, the only thing you're doing is running the ceremonies, and any secretary can do that. So leadership in Agile is much more about creating the right environment so that the team can really succeed without being their secretary.
Larry, how do you see the roles different?
I'm not sure I have very much to add. The only thing I'll say here is, from an Agile perspective, the Scrum Masters, like I said earlier, facilitator, coaching, and I think Brian did a pretty good job of enumerating the items in terms of ensuring that the framework is followed. And I think we know what the traditional project manager does, so there's no need in repeating that.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have anything to add?
I think we've covered the topic pretty good, but I'll add just one little bit in the area of responsibility. So in a traditional project, you have very distinct roles. If you're in the software development, QAs, BAs, developers, so forth and so on. When a particular task in a traditional waterfall project is not accomplished, you can usually trace the responsibility back to a single person or a single role, right? The difference on the Agile team is, if something doesn't get done, that whole team owns that thing that didn't get done. So in the normal software development lifecycle, testing's at the very end. And so usually the tester, the QAs, they have the least amount of time to do their tasks. In the traditional world, well, you got it. It's, you're out of time, but that's your problem. In the Agile type environment, that's not the case. The whole team is responsible for that. They own it. And so it's the responsibility of all the team members to jump in where they can and assist the other team members with whatever their task is, so the whole team can experience the success. That's a big shift. That's a big shift in thinking in organizations.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's move on to our next question. Start back with Brian. What one piece of advice would you give to new Agile teams?
Have patience. It takes a while to learn the art of Agile. You can, like Ron said, you can go through the ceremonies, but that cohesiveness, that fluidity of effort to start at a set of stories and end with a demonstration to the customer or the business of complete functionality that met whatever the story said that they wanted to do. To do that efficiently, and to do that within the time box you set, and to do that consistently at a pace that you can maintain over time, that takes a lot of patience. So keep your eyes open and just learn, and it'll come eventually.
Ron, what one piece of advice would you have?
Just one. Everyone participates. I use a technique called Fist of 5. And I use it because every team is comprised of introverts and extroverts, or you've got someone on the team that is really overpowering everyone else. I'm the architect, I know everything. Well, that doesn't work. So you use a Fist of 5 technique where at the same time, everyone holds up their hand and votes. 5 means I really agree totally. 4 is I agree. 3 means I agree with reservations. 2 means I disagree. And 1, notice it's his finger, says I hate it. But if anyone says a 1 or a 2, the entire team stops and rediscusses, readjusts, and participates. And that way, everyone's forced to talk, everyone commits, and the team can move on as a team.
Fantastic. Larry, what one piece of advice do you have?
For an Agile team, I think the team has to be open-minded. Things that I would throw out, keywords that I would throw out to this team or team members is, first of all, use your facilitator, i.e. Scrum Master. Use your product owner. use the team members. I think that person has to be team-oriented, has to be a fairly good communicator, or at least work towards becoming a good communicator, because remember, the responsibility falls to the team, not to one person. Willing to learn, I believe that got mentioned earlier. Be creative, self-starter, be honest, create trust. Because the team is now what's creating or delivering this product for the product owner via transparency. Why? Because the product owner is there. So you definitely have to have the ability to communicate, among other items. But I think communications, being team-oriented is like number one. So if you were recruiting, in my opinion, team members into an agile team, those are the things that I would be looking for. Yes, you may not be able to get everything that you're looking for, and you may have a quiet Java person, which is fine, but I think that's something that the Scrum Master may have to work with to try to pull that person out of their own little box, if you want to call it that.
Okay. All right, Jeff, what's your one piece of advice for a new Agile team?
My one piece of advice would be stick to the basics. As we discussed a little bit earlier in the conversation, typically when you put a new team together, not everybody shares the same understanding and has the same level of experience. And so what typically happens is through participation, different people will suggest a certain way to do things based on their experience or their understanding of Agile. And it almost always works out to be, some very advanced techniques, some not so advanced techniques, some techniques in the middle. Start with the basics. Once you're confident that everybody's on board and has the same understanding and it's working, then you can start to tweak the process if it's needed. But don't try to get fancy too quick. Just do the basics and you'll enjoy success pretty quick.
Fantastic. Definitely agree with everything y'all said.
Can I add one thing with that?
Of course.
As Jeff was talking, I remember taking a management class as an undergrad. And what I do remember about teams are things like forming, storming, norming. You're going to have to go through those stages, regardless whether you're a traditional team or an agile team. I think it's more important in an agile team because there's new methods, new approaches that you'll be practicing with regards, and this is maybe a big disclaimer, with regards to the organization that you've been hired to do work at. All right. And I say it that way because most corporations today, and obviously my knowledge is limited, so I'll throw that caveat in there. They're not going to be all agile. In fact, if you go work for a fairly large corporation, I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be a lot of legacy thinking as opposed to, agility.
Okay, thank you very much. Going back to Brian, now how would you work with a non-agile team?
Waterfall team?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's a whole different approach. Much more directive, much more structured, a lot less communication, unfortunately, a lot less business involvement. In fact, a lot of cases in a waterfall project, you got to track down the customer or the business partner to drag information out of them. They don't seem to have as willing and open participation. They basically want to give you the requirements and go away and do their business and come back and see the results. But I found that to be pretty ineffective.
Ron?
Okay, I looked at the question slightly differently. If you're on an agile team and you have to get something from a non-agile team, identify that early. Talk to them, get on their schedule, figure it out, but use them as a long pole. So plan up front, as far as when you're doing your risk analysis, because that will always be one of your risks, is if you've got to get something from a non-agile team. So plan on those interactions early and adjust.
In fact, that's usually a risk. You want to identify that early, that's for sure.
All right. Larry, your take?
The way I looked at this question was maybe having an initiative that has hybrid methodologies. In other words, you may be working, this project may call for just to keep it simple, web portal components, but you also, those components require let's say, interfacing or data from a legacy backend application, i.e. mainframe. So my experience has been is on the mainframe side, those guys are going to be most likely traditional, all right? Especially if it's a fairly large enterprise application. And obviously the web portal folks are using a form of agile methodology. What I would do is I would try to stick on top of things, because I think it is a little bit difficult to work with a traditional team. What I would do, and actually what I have done in a particular project of that type, is try to encourage cross-team participation, because eventually the legacy folks are probably going to have to move away from traditional, but maybe not agile as it's prescribed. I would want the traditional folks to see agile in action and vice versa. All right, the agile folks to maybe notice some of the risks that was pointing out, or maybe the fact that work is done differently. You want to manage risks due to those interdependencies, as what was pointed out earlier, especially the complex ones. Share project plans, and hopefully have intersection points so that both teams understand where do we connect. Are there deliverables, from my end of the traditional side that are dependent or required on the agile side?
Okay, thank you. Jeff, what's your take on the subject?
The way I read the question was there's two teams working together. One's an agile team, perhaps one's a waterfall team. And my advice would be, regardless of which team you happen to be on, is one, establish a very robust communication plan. How are you going to communicate with that other team? Because both teams have different rhythms. The other thing would be establish a common lexicon. Waterfall teams, agile teams speak totally different languages. And if you don't share the same understanding of what, for example, what is done on a waterfall project, it's typically measured percentage-wise, 25% done, 50%. Most people are familiar with that, right? Agile, it's 0 or 100%, either done or you're not done. Well, that puts a lot of people into panic when you say that I'm not done, or 0% done. Well, if they don't understand what that means, that can cause a real crisis. So a good communication plan and a common lexicon, and you'll go a long ways with just those two things.
All right, thank you, Jeff. All right, let's go to our final question for agile teams. Start back with Brian. Now, how would you work with a team that's separated by distance, that's distributed all over the country, maybe even in a different country?
Like India.
Part of the world. Yes, exactly. How would you deal with that in agile?
That's where one of the things that I hate the most about Agile is the tool sets that exist. The one I'm using is far from desirable, to say the least, but electronic means. Have a tool set out there that can manage your stories, manage your activities throughout the iteration, track the tasks, and have at least a daily touch point with that team, either through a liaison. I've done it both ways, where I've gotten in real early and called over to the remote team, had a separate stand up with them, or I've had just one of the team members who was acting as lead be the liaison and corral up all the activities from the team, any questions they have, any issues, and then we talk about it at the normal stand up with the onboard team. So there's lots of ways of approaching that. It is a tricky challenge. There's cultural barriers, language barriers, et cetera, that you have to overcome. But with the right preparation and considerations for all of the machinations of managing folks halfway around the world, you can usually manage to work your way through it.
Thank you. Ron, what's your take?
Okay, understanding that 90% of what you learn is through osmosis, just by being around other people, hearing them talk. So one of the things that we've done, if it's in the same country, is always on video. So a PC that's always on with video camera and microphone here, another one over there, just have the environment so that, the communication can go on. Voice calls daily, email sucks. There's no communication with emails. So voice when you can. Shifting hours helps. Isolating the work in terms of separate stories for this part of the team over here, and have the team that's remote do a separate set of stories. But techniques such as that, because you've got to have the communication, and then you do have to use an electronic method of making everything visible.
All right, thank you. Larry, what's your take?
Originally, I think the thinking for an agile team is, in order to be effective, communications, it's best to really be local, but with our diverse workforce, it's kind of hard to do that today. The other thing is, when you're local, you establish rapport. There's certain things that happen. I mean, I believe Ron kind of touched on this. But my point here is, you need to establish trust, and you need to establish a rapport across the team. What I've done in the past, especially with folks in India, is sole management on the fact that I need these 3 or 4 team members to actually come over to the US and sit with us for maybe 2 or 3 months. And that establishes some of your common grounding in terms of rapport, how we get things done on the team. They know who so-and-so is through a physical aspect. You might even find out what are some of the weaknesses just through body language. And the other thing is to use whatever you can to make yourself visible, physically visible virtually. And that would mean video conferencing, which again is something that got touched on. And I mean a good tool. I don't mean one that has a 30-minute delay. And maybe even instant messaging is another thing. And whenever you do talk about something, use presentation software or any type of software that lets you draw something on your screen and it's actually being projected across sites. So, the AV component of it, the audiovisual component of it, and the fact that you can collaborate real time, I think goes a long way.
All right, thank you, Larry. Jeff, what's your take on it?
So there's been entire books written on this single question right here. This is a very broad topic. There's probably 1,001 ways to do it. I think it's just as much art as it is science. I would just say this. I would invest early and upfront in the team members and getting to know them, whether they're within your city, within your country, or out of the country. Spend some time with some icebreakers, getting to know those people, who they are, and trying to establish some sort of relationship. That's the first piece. Second piece, leverage every piece of technology that you possibly can. There's just so many things out there that you can leverage. And Ron had mentioned, voice versus written communication. And in a typical communication model, voice is preferred over written, face-to-face is preferred over written communication and so forth. But there's always exceptions. And I'll give you an example. I was on a project out of DC and working with a number of vendor partners. And one of the team members on the other team was from Chinese origin. Nobody could understand what he was saying when we'd have a good phone call, a daily meeting. I mean, I would get every 50th word. And we tried to slow him down, and he just spoke so fast, and he had such an accent that finally we realized the best way to communicate with that one particular team member was just to ask him, say, hey, we're having a hard time understanding you. When you need to communicate, can you just go on to IM? And he could type fast too. So it wasn't an issue at all. He would just whip it out and type it out, and we were all like, okay, we got it. So you really have to be creative and think outside the box with distributed teams, but it can be done.
One last thing. The worst word in the entire world when you're working with offshore teams is the word yes. Because in other cultures, yes can mean, yes, I heard you. yes, I understand you. And you have to pull it out if you really want to know, yes, I'm going to do this in the time frame that I want. Be very careful with yes. You can be separated by the same language.
All right, thank you.
Just one little tidbit I want to share. One of the speakers last fall with the Alamo Agilistas was some data genius, and I can't remember his name right now. Macaroni sticks in my head. Mike Macaroni, I think was his name. He's a data genius. He derives information from data. And one of the studies he did was comparative productivity of dispersed teams. One of the principles that we're supposed to live by in Agile is co-location. So he wanted to look at co-location. So he studied 4 different teams. One that was dispersed across the world, like India and the United States. One team that was dispersed just in the continent of the United States. One team that was dispersed across the state area, and then one team that completely co-located. Guess which team was the most productive? What's that?
One that was completely co-located.
Nope.
No.
The team within the state region was absolutely by far the most productive. Don't know why. There was no rhyme or reason, and it was completely against Agile basic principles of how to operate. So interesting. Just wanted to throw that out, maybe to be contrary, but that little tidbit of factual data analysis really stuck in my head. And he's coming back this year, so look for him. He's a great guy.
All right, fantastic. All right, move on to our final topic, Agile education. I'll start with Ron. All right, Agile's got a lot of different methods, Scrum, extreme programming. I mean, the list just goes on, scaled Agile. Now, what would you recommend for new practitioners, like students, to start off learning, and why would you choose that method?
I have 2 answers. It depends on whether or not your team is a service organization or you're actually developing. If it's a service organization, you almost always have to start with Kanban, only because Kanban allows for constant interruptions. But normally, for 90% of the projects, I would choose Scrum because it's closest to what people know. You still break stories down into tasks, and then the individual people can concentrate on the tasks. And you can get into a cadence a lot easier. So definitely Scrum.
Thank you, Ron. Larry, your take?
I would say Scrum. It's a great starting place. There's a lot of information on Scrum. There's a lot of derivatives of Scrum. So I think if you're going to be in a development type of environment, Scrum would be a good place to start. Extreme programming, I see that more as a development practice or developer's practice. It's a little bit more radical. The only one instance that I have is where you may have like an expert and a novice and you want to pair them up as you're coding or programming. And hopefully it's a situation where the novice is learning from the expert, and it's not a situation where the expert is saying, here's what I'm going to do, and here you go. So I would say Scrum would be probably the highest recommendation on my side, with the exception that Ron listed earlier.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, what's your take?
I would consider the PMI ACP certification only because it covers the big 3, the Scrum, the XP, and the Lean. You really need to, at least at a macro level, understand all 3 of those. If for no other reason, it's just so when you hear something that doesn't quite sound right, you'll know the difference in terminology and whatnot. And then Kanban is, although that's not really part of that PMI ACP certification, Kanban it's easy to learn, it's fun, and it definitely has a practical use in almost every organization. You could find a place to use it. So.
All right, thank you. And Brian?
Oh, I have to be loyal to my PMI chapter and say that ACP certification is absolutely first consideration. I agree.
Thanks for sitting.
All
Sir,
Well, I'm an instructor too, so.
Me too.
We are the student branch of Alamo PMI, so we all have a little bias.
Awesome.
PMI here.
Y'all want to have a course, just let us know.
All right, I'd like to thank our panelists. Let's open it up to an open forum.
Can I ask a question first?
Of course.
Are there any veterans in the crowd? Awesome. You guys are already halfway there. Transition from military, whatever your rank was or whatever your MOS was or whatever, all that training you got when you're in the military, it transfers directly into the project management career. All the same skills. You just call it something different. The challenge that you will have is learning the language of project management and applying that to what you already know. Don't get into bad habits. Learn something new. But if you want to come talk to me about it afterwards, do so.
All right, open questions from the audience. Right there.
What would you say the ratio of women to men in the project management area is?
Definitely not enough women around. And the ones that I've met are extraordinary.
Of course, well, I see all men. I'm like, where are the women?
I don't know.
I think it depends on your organization. So at Frost Bank, off the top of my head, there's more women than there are men project managers.
That's unusual in my experience.
And my wife is a project manager.
Yeah.
I actually reached out to Jeff's wife first, and she wasn't available, and Jeff was.
So you got the B roster.
Actually, what I was going to say is this is probably not a representative sample, but maybe now it is after that fact. I worked at Fidelity Investments, the mutual fund giant, for about 25 years. And to answer your question, certainly the ratio was high on the male side, but it wasn't a 90-10 ratio. It was probably closer to maybe a 60-40. And there were a lot of women that were very good at what they did. In fact, one SVP that runs personal investing is a woman at Fidelity Investments, and that's a fairly large business unit within the Fidelity umbrella. So they're there. I'm not sure if you're coming from, are they at 50-50 or they need to be at 50-50 or should be 80-20? Heavy on the female side.
I come from the banking industry.
Yep.
I worked for Chase for a couple of years and Broadway Bank as well. And I had a great experience. All my bosses were girls, like our branches were full of girls. But once you moved up the ladder, it seemed to kind of, and I just wonder why. It's just so.
Well, here's something you might find interesting. I was at an Agile conference last year up in Dallas. Capital One was hosting the conference. And I don't recall the lady's name, but the CIO of Capital One is a female. I believe she's Hispanic, and she was a huge advocate of Agile. And she had a lot to do with Capital One's transformation. They didn't get it right the first time. So there are women moving up through the ranks. They're there.
Thank you.
I know on our membership team at Alamo PMI, there's only 3 guys with me and 2 others, and the rest of it is all female project managers. So they're there. You just got it. I mean, if you come to our meetings, Alamo PMI, I've always sit at a table that has a lot of women at it, and it's definitely they always very good to go and talk to and network with, and they're always willing to help you out, especially students. Right. Are there any other questions from the audience?
I have 2 questions. Real quick, I wanted to tell you, I work at USAA. Our new CIO is a woman. So, and USAA is really big on women in technology. So, actually, I'm joining your team on Monday.
Oh, you are?
As a Scrum Master.
Your team?
And so my first question is,
Which one of
Uh,
us?
Which one of us?
Which one of us?
Ron,
Ron's team. Oh, lucky
Which
you.
team?
the Undergrad Peach.
Oh, okay, great.
Cool.
So my first question was, what advice would you give a new Scrum Master? And my second question is, what are your preferred Agile tools
Agile with, you know, the tool, because we use RTC, which isn't great. But I was wondering what your favorite one, like which you prefer. So it's open to all you guys. So tool and bet your a piece of advice for a new Scrum Master.
New Scrum Master make the environment good for the team to actually succeed, because it's that environment that actually allows them to succeed. And I prefer Rally, but realistically, RTC is not all that bad. That's because you don't like it.
I like version 1. Yeah, I used it for about 9 months until they scanned it and brought in that ugly beast RTC. Not real fond of that because of the interface. It just requires a lot of labor to do. See, when I have a tool, when I'm doing projects and I got a tool, I want the tool to enhance my ability to do things. I don't want to take my time to fix the damn tool to do what I need it to do. It's supposed to do what I want it to do so I can go do other things, not spend all my time making it do what it's supposed to do, wasting my time.
Got it.
That's my endorsement for RTC.
We need to have lunch sessions.
Yeah.
We're gonna let them go out back later on after this.
Fight it out.
We'll duke it out.
And you guys?
So one nugget of advice is if you're a Scrum Master joining a new team, bring donuts every day.
Oh, yeah.
Every day.
Helps.
You'll be a success.
Okay. Corporate karma.
Don't be afraid to ask questions is really important because, I mean, you're out there, you know, you're supposed to be the leader and know everything and it's your first time out. You don't know nothing, but nobody wants to tell you that. And, you know, don't be afraid to ask because people are really willing to help you.
Don't make changes right away. Sit back and look and learn first.
Good question.
What I would say is learning, I think, is probably one of the items I would throw out to a new Scrum Master. Learn your people. Learn whatever it is that you're trying to work with in terms of delivery with your product owner. Maybe learn a little bit about the technology, not I mean getting down into the weeds that's being utilized. Maybe learn about the product. You'll just add more value to the team, to the product owner. And if there's any roadblocks, you might have just a little bit more intelligence to kind of assist in clearing that roadblock. Tools. I'm going to hesitate, but I'm going to say RTC. And the only reason is that's the tool that we were given. I can tell you two things, that the object-oriented teams liked it. The non-object-oriented teams did not like it. You can make your own conclusions out of that. I think the reason for that is for the OO guys, it was pretty simple to administer. For the mainframe folks, too much of pain in the you-know-where. And I know that there was a lot of time spent in terms of building interfaces, pretty much to what I think Brian said, if that's what Brian meant.
Yeah, sort of.
But RTC, and I'll just leave it at that.
Take one more question from the audience. I'll take two more. Question.
So I come from commercial construction background, and I've been a project manager for 4 going on 5 years, and I've looked at the Agile and tried to see how to actually implement it. Under some of the waterfall approaches, I guess you would say, is it impossible to implement in construction? Because a lot of the construction, you have your set schedule, you have what you need to do, the specifications call it exactly what needs to be done. It's always a changing environment because you have your owner adding different amount of scope, and scope creep can come in with schedule shifts, but there's always a point A and a point Z, and the direction's laid out, and it just, I've had trouble trying to apply. Lean, we're doing a good job applying, but the Agile approach seems to be kind of tough from what I've seen.
I think you answered your own question.
Okay.
In construction is probably the best example you can give. You wouldn't build a house and design it and blueprint it as you're building. You're going to have that blueprint up front. So it's probably not a good approach.
Yeah, construction.
Tag on, I know she's kind of in the conversation right now. But as far as the question for the project management with women, I've interviewed quite a few because when I got brought up through being a superintendent and into a project management, who I learned from, my mentor, he was like, always try to find women project managers, because especially in construction, they're very black and white, where some of the male project managers will strike a deal and work something out there to the documents. And he said, try to find them. Well, I've had issues with interviewing some, because some have been more than capable, have the resume, and they shy towards wanting to step in that position because of the fear of some of the confrontation they may get in the field, which I understand. It's been years and years and years of an issue, but that's been my problem with hiring or trying to hire is not the unwillingness, but the fear, I guess, of having to take on that monster. So I think it's something that over time it's shifting, but it's just something that's taking time, in my opinion.
I see construction as too linear to be agile, but project management originated from the construction industry. So glad to see one out there.
Architecture would be another good example. It's pretty black and white. You wouldn't build some sort of enterprise as you go. You would know what you want up front and exactly how it goes together. And the reason why I brought that up is I've been asked, well, we need to do this agile. No. Matter of fact, I dare you to Google it. Google an agile architecture project. I've yet to find a hit.
Actually, you can do agile home building though, and Google that. I heard something a couple of years ago where there was a company that was building prefab houses and allowed it was compartmentalized enough so that each room could be brought in and dropped in, and then it would just automatically adjust. So you could actually use some agile principles there.
Maybe with the 3D printing, because I know in Japan, they're starting to 3D print a lot of the houses, and they're very modular, so they're coming out the same, and you can adjust the 3D printer to however you would need it to go. But I guess maybe you could apply, like you said.
One of the things I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I was going to mention is, I'm not originally from San Antonio, but whenever one of the hotels was built downtown, it was probably more JIT. But I thought they did almost what you said, is bring in like a room, and basically just right, exactly.
And they'll even fly rooms in.
And yeah, if you take the boat ride down there, they'll tell you that they even built the rooms offsite with the coffee makers already in them, and just dropped them in, just like Legos.
Yeah, if that guy didn't meet the schedule, he was going to buy it back for $1.
Right.
And I'm not familiar with that store. I didn't personally see it, but to me, that sounds more of an incremental delivery versus they might have called it agile, but that's really, in my opinion, not really agile. It's more of an incremental delivery. Look, here's a room, here's a room, here's a room. There's not a lot of learning, I wouldn't think, in that approach.
Right, in that case, there wasn't.
Yeah, once you said you're for that type of practice, you would spend probably a year pre-construction planning, and then at that point, everything's prefabbed and brought in phases.
And I think that's just more of not everybody sharing the same terminology. Again, I didn't see the article or the video, but somebody might say, hey, we're doing this agile. Well, maybe not exactly, so it's good to know the difference.
One last comment, in terms of construction and scope creep. I don't want this to come out the wrong way. The builder's always going to make money on it anyway. Because I remember when I was building my houses back in, for another 5,000, here's what we can do. It's like, great, okay.
Yeah, I think residential's a little different than.
Sure, I understand.
The owners
Sure.
It's tough, but companies that don't want to make money off of that scope creep and realize a lot of them see it as a way to make money. I tend to think the good companies realize that the more time they're on a job site, the more money they're losing. But it takes a while to figure that out.
Let's take our final question from the audience. Name with the hat.
So I just wanted to real quick just a little bit. So I work for Rackspace, and there actually is initiatives in companies for women in leadership, and we have some pretty skilled women that are running major projects at Rackspace. So it's initiatives that are going within companies. But my comment or question was, for those of you who work in multiple industries, which group did you find more challenging to bring on team involvement with Agile? Being with IT folks, when you work with the coder, it's like, well, that's my code. You know, how do you get them opened up and involve the other folks that are involved?
Actually, the most fun way that I have is to lead with test. So before a developer or a coder can actually even write their first piece of code, you make sure that they meet with a tester, that they start understanding exactly how it's going to be tested, and basically show the coder that they're not the center of the world. And that is a really big lesson to learn. And then everyone becomes team members.
I cook a hell of a gumbo, and usually at a luncheon or something, that's a really great way to break the ice.
Good. We're having gumbo next week.
And those Texas boys, brisket.
That's it, Mark.
Gotta have that brisket.
There you go.
Gotta have brisket.
Team events or team builders like that really go a long way.
All right, I'd like to thank our audience, all the students that helped develop the questions. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panelists for being having this open discussion with us. Thank you very much. And everyone have a good night. And don't forget to join us next Wednesday when we have our career workshop. So you want a job. Great for students who are about to graduate. And everyone have a good night. Panelists, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I brought cards if anybody wants cards.